My name is Amelia Vance. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm. I was standing by the punch bowl at my cousin Sarah's graduation party, trying to look engaged in a conversation about student loan interest rates, when a shadow fell over me. I turned, and my heart actually skipped a beat. There she was, standing less than 3 feet away, a fixed smile on her face, looking exactly as I remembered her, just a little more brittle around the eyes. Carol. My stepmother, or rather, my former stepmother. I hadn't seen her in 9 years. Amelia, darling. Look at you, all grown up and successful, she chirped, her voice a little too loud, drawing a few curious glances. Before I could even formulate a polite, non-committal greeting, she leaned in conspiratorially, her hand briefly touching my arm. I knew I'd find you. I'm finally going back to finish my degree, you know. It's a huge step, and honestly, I need about $50,000 for tuition and living expenses. You're doing so well, I knew you'd understand. My carefully constructed professional composure almost shattered. $50,000. Just like that. For her. My smile tightened, a painful muscle memory, as I searched for an escape. I managed a vague, "That's a lot, Carol. We should catch up properly sometime," before pivoting sharply and disappearing into the crowd, my mind reeling. She wouldn't get a dime. Not this time. To understand the sheer audacity of Carol's demand, you need to know about the first time she walked out of our lives. My biological mother passed away from a sudden illness when I was 12. It left my father, Richard, utterly adrift. He was a kind, gentle man, but he'd always relied on my mother's practical nature. 3 years later, when I was 15, Carol swept into our lives like a brightly colored, slightly chaotic whirlwind. She was charming, effervescent, and always had a big idea on the horizon: a boutique pet store, an organic juice bar, a line of artisanal candles. None of these ventures ever materialized beyond a few expensive purchases, and each one seemed to drain a little more from my father's savings, leaving him increasingly stressed and me increasingly resentful. I saw through her almost immediately, but my dad, lonely and vulnerable, was completely taken by her charm. She knew exactly how to make him feel important, appreciated, and loved, all while subtly extracting money for her latest investment opportunity or startup capital. I watched as his nest egg, built carefully over decades, slowly dwindled. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. When I was 19, Carol left. Abruptly. She packed a single suitcase, left a vague, flowery note about needing to find herself and pursue her true calling, and vanished, taking a significant chunk of Richard's remaining savings with her. My father was devastated, both financially and emotionally. He never fully recovered, and the experience left him wary, but also, I suspected, still yearning for the affection Carol had offered. My mother, before she passed, had given me a small, handcrafted ceramic mug for my 10th birthday. It was a deep forest green, with a tiny, iridescent dragonfly etched into the side. She told me it was special, just for me, for my morning tea or hot chocolate. Carol, in her time with us, once accidentally chipped the rim of that mug and then, with a dismissive wave, tried to replace it with a garish, mass-produced novelty mug that said, "World's Best Stepdaughter," a mug I never once used. The chipped dragonfly mug, however, I kept, a quiet, enduring symbol of what was real. A few days after the graduation party, Carol started appearing at my father's house. Unannounced, of course. My dad, bless his heart, was too polite to turn her away, even though I could see the discomfort etched on his face. She'd bring over a cheap bottle of wine or a store-bought cake, making vague, nostalgic comments about their happy times together, all while subtly trying to reinsert herself into his daily routine. During one of these visits, she cornered me again, pulling out a crumpled brochure for a local community college. It was for a general studies program, nothing specific, but she talked about it as if it were a prestigious university. "It's my second chance, Amelia," she declared, her eyes shining with what looked like genuine conviction, though I knew better. "Your father always wanted me to finish my education. And with your help, I can finally do it." The amount she needed had mysteriously increased. After looking at the costs and living expenses, it's really closer to 60,000. You understand how these things add up, right? She made it sound like an investment, a noble pursuit. I just nodded, feigning sympathy, my mind already calculating the actual tuition costs for that college, nowhere near $60,000. The numbers stopped looking accidental. What I didn't understand yet was the extent of her desperation. She started sending me texts and emails, growing more insistent with each message. The tone shifted from charming requests to thinly veiled guilt trips. "Your father always believed in me, Amelia," one text read. "It would mean so much to him if you supported my dreams, too. Family helps family, right?" She even tried to leverage my younger cousin, Sarah, who had just graduated. Carol called Sarah, asking her to talk sense into me, painting herself as a struggling woman trying to better herself, a victim of circumstance. Sarah, thankfully, was smarter than that and immediately called me, confused and a little disgusted. I also noticed the inconsistencies in Carol's story. In one email, she mentioned wanting a degree in business management to finally launch her entrepreneurial spirit. A week later, in a text, she was passionately talking about studying holistic wellness and becoming a life coach. The details never quite aligned, a telltale sign of someone improvising. It was like watching a poorly rehearsed play, and I was expected to be the credulous audience. Then, the demands became less polite and more direct. One afternoon, I found her waiting for me outside my apartment building, leaning against the brick wall, looking like she'd been there for a while. She had a thick manila envelope in her hand. "Amelia, we need to talk," she said, her voice dropping its usual sweetness. She pulled out a financial aid application form. My father's name was pre-filled in the guarantor section, along with his social security number, information she must have remembered from their marriage. "Your father just needs to sign here," she instructed, pointing to a line. "And then you can help with the payments. It's really just a formality." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about college money anymore. This was about trapping my father in a financial obligation he couldn't afford, an obligation she expected me to cover. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "You know, your father still has that little nest egg, doesn't he? From his mother's inheritance. It's just sitting there, not doing anyone any good. He could easily put some of that towards my education, too. It's what family does." That was the first real threat. That inheritance was his retirement fund, carefully guarded after Carol had already depleted so much. She wasn't asking, she was trying to strong-arm her way back into his life and his finances. She was trying to recreate the past, but this time, I was an adult, a financial analyst, and I was ready. I realized Carol wasn't genuinely interested in going to college. This elaborate story was just a cover, a sophisticated scam designed to exploit my father's vulnerability and my own perceived financial stability. She saw a chance to reinsert herself, to regain access to whatever she thought she was entitled to. She wasn't seeking a second chance at education, she was seeking a second chance at extracting money. She was targeting me because I was successful, because I was my father's daughter, and because she probably assumed I'd be too polite or too intimidated to refuse her outright. Using my skills as a financial analyst, I started digging. Discreetly, of course, sticking to publicly available information. I checked the community college Carol had mentioned, the general studies program existed, but the tuition costs were nowhere near $60,000. Furthermore, the enrollment dates she'd cited didn't align with the college's actual academic calendar. I couldn't find any current enrollment for a Carol Vance, or her maiden name in any public educational databases. A quick search of public records revealed a bankruptcy filing under her name from 7 years ago, which my father had indeed helped her clear up, compounding his financial woes. More recently, I found an eviction notice filed against her from an apartment complex a few towns over, dated just 2 months prior. She was desperate and homeless. I gathered all the texts, emails, and the crumpled brochure, compiling a folder of irrefutable evidence. I also had a difficult but necessary conversation with my father. I didn't accuse, I just reminded him, gently, of Carol's past financial irresponsibility, the big ideas that vanished, the money that disappeared, and the emotional toll her abrupt departure had taken on him. I showed him the eviction notice, explaining that her college dream was likely a desperate attempt to secure housing and funds. He listened, his face etched with a familiar sadness, but this time, also a flicker of understanding. I arranged a meeting at my father's house, inviting my trusted Aunt Clara, my mother's sister, as a neutral witness. Carol arrived, looking confident, almost smug, clearly expecting a check or at least a negotiation. She wore a new, bright scarf, a stark contrast to the desperation I knew she was feeling. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done my homework as a child, where my mother had served countless meals. "So, Amelia, have you thought about my tuition?" Carol began, reaching for the financial aid form she'd brought. I took a deep breath. "Yes, Carol, I have," I said, my voice steady. I pushed the folder across the table. "I've looked into your college plans very thoroughly. The tuition for that general studies program is about 1/10 of what you're asking for. The enrollment dates you mentioned don't exist. And I've also found your recent eviction notice and your past bankruptcy. You're not going to college, Carol. You're trying to exploit my father and me for money and a place to stay." Carol's face, usually so expressive, went from confident to utterly blank, then slowly, a deep flush spread across her cheeks. She tried to bluster, to accuse me of being heartless, of fabricating lies, but with Aunt Clara sitting silently, observing, and the cold, hard evidence laid out before her, her manipulation fell flat. "How dare you," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "After everything I did for your father." Richard, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Carol, Amelia is right. I can't do this again. I won't. This is over." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in years, and I saw a flicker of his old strength return. Carol, defeated, crumpled the college brochure in her hand and stormed out, leaving it on the table like a discarded dream. In the weeks that followed, Carol tried a few more times to contact us, sending angry, then pleading texts, but I blocked her number and email. My father, finally free from her influence, changed his locks and set firmer boundaries for any unexpected visitors. He even started seeing a therapist, admitting he'd been starting to fall for Carol's act again, and wanted to understand why. He began to reclaim his life, slowly, steadily. Months later, I was at my father's house, helping him sort through some old photographs. He made us both tea. On the kitchen shelf, prominently displayed, was my mother's handcrafted ceramic mug, the one with the iridescent dragonfly. It was still chipped at the rim, a tiny imperfection, but it was whole, and it was clean. He used it now, not carelessly, but with a quiet reverence. I took a sip from my own solid, unchipped mug, the warmth spreading through my hands. The quiet certainty of a boundary held, a home protected.